Hello everyone, I'm Mustagikafo, and today we are continuing the madness at the Darkmoon Faire card reviews. And this time we're going to be looking at Mage, Paladin, and Priest. So let's get right into it with Mage. I came up with two definitive archetypes that are supported by Madness at the Darkmoon Faire. And we're going to start with the Elemental package, which has Confection Cyclone, Firework Elemental, and Grand Finale. This package is looking fairly promising actually because of a lot of elemental support throughout the last 2 years. Confection Cyclone I think perfectly fits into this archetype because it fuels elemental triggers for so many turns. Like having a constant stream of 1 mana elementals is great for having those previously inconsistent synergies where you have to play an elemental on the turn before, making those fairly simple to pull off instead of a burden that the deck has to work around. Firework Elemental, though, is an interesting case. Its corrupted form is very hard to achieve in a small spell mage, and it would have to be worked into a different form of elemental mage rather than the small spell version, or it could just be in a different deck. The low curve of small spell mage doesn't really allow for many good corruption opportunities for Firework Elemental. I mean, there are some, but they're few and far between. And last is Grand Finale, which I think is a great payoff card. Playing 2 elementals on turn 7 and then summoning 3 8/8s on turn 8 is a pretty good deal. But the problem with it is that they're 8/8s with no other keywords. They have little impact on the board the turn that they're played. That's the only problem with it. The next archetype we have is Secret Mage. The cards that fit into that are Game Master, Rigged Fair Game, Occult Conjurer, Ring Toss, and Sage Seer of Darkmoon. Now this archetype is probably going to be leagues better than the small spell elemental mage or the control elemental mage, if that even becomes a thing. Occult Conjurer. This card is a 4 mana 8/8 whenever you have a secret on board, which is absolutely amazing for this kind of deck. There have been other secret payoff cards, but for whatever reason they've been lackluster and haven't carried the secret archetype, but I think this is the one that's going to get it jump started after all this time. And Rigged Fair Game is the perfect secret to trigger Occult Conjurer with. It usually lingers on turn 3. Your opponent is going to be dealing damage to you. Rigged Fair Game on 3 and 4 mana 8/8 next turn. Game Master is also a consideration, but I don't think it'll make the cut just because of other secret synergies. Game Master's a bit lackluster. It's Kirin Mage, but at worse stats, pretty much. And it probably won't survive to see its effect trigger twice. I don't think Game Master's gonna make the cut. And another one that I don't think will make the cut in an aggro Secret Mage at least is Ring Toss, because corrupting it is just too slow. The payoff for corruption is pretty good, but I don't think it's worth it when you have stuff like Occult Conjurer in that same 4 mana slot. And lastly is Sage, which is a great draw engine for Secret Mage. It's what the deck needed to stay afloat in Standard. And then we have a couple outliers in Mage, ones that didn't clearly fit into a certain deck archetype just by their text, but I think they have clear places, and those being Deck of Lunacy and Mask of Cthulhu. I think Deck of Lunacy goes straight into the small spell mage, just because you get so much value from your new spells. In small spell mage, the spells you cast don't really matter too much, as long as they're spells, whereas in other mage decks they matter a lot more. And Mask of Cthulhu is kind of expensive for its effect. So all in all, Secret Mage is going to be the dominant archetype of mage, and there will be a small spell mage of some kind, whether it be an elemental version or some other version, and maybe some Yogg-Saron shenanigans here and there. And up next we have Paladin. I think the most complicated class, at least for grouping things into archetypes. One archetype I was able to definitively come up with was N'Zoth Paladin. That includes Red Scale Dragon Tamer, Carousel Griffin, and Hammer of the Naru. Starting off with Red Scale Dragon Tamer, I think this card can also be used in Murloc Paladin, a list that uses some dragons that have Murloc synergy. But for this expansion, it makes the most sense to put it into N'Zoth Paladin, because it's a Murloc and it draws a dragon, fueling the N'Zoth twice. And it has a pretty good body too. And then we have Carousel Griffin, which is the mech for N'Zoth. Its corrupted form is very efficient. While it may not be that good when played, summoning it back off of N'Zoth is a great payoff. And then there's the same sort of deal with Hammer of the Naru. It summons an elemental, which can be summoned by N'Zoth. But this one is better than Carousel Griffin just because of the 3/3 weapon. And I think it'll make the difference when other decks are trying to consider it. And the second archetype is Silverhand Recruit Paladin, which includes Balloon Merchant, Day at the Fair, Carnival Barker, and Lithraxian the Redeemed. Carnival Barker, Day at the Fair, Balloon Merchant, and Lithraxian are all pretty self-explanatory because they synergize with Silverhand Recruits. Now, whether this translates into a purely Silverhand Recruit focused deck, where the focus is to summon a bunch of minions and go face quickly, or that Silverhand Recruit package will be put into a pure Paladin, remains to be determined. But overall, each of these cards is pretty good. A few of them are even good on their own. I would say that Lithraxian is just good in a deck. Like, playing it and having all your future 1/1s have Divine Shield, it's pretty much like a Justicar Trueheart. It upgrades your hero power. I think that's a pretty significant buff that a lot of decks might actually want to have as a 30th card. And then I get to the weird other category, which includes Oh My Yogg and Snack Run. Oh My Yogg is a great card and could possibly be played in non-secret decks just because of its effect. Sometimes it could be a better counterspell, sometimes it could really mess up your opponent's game plan, but other times it's not really that bad. It all depends on the luck of the draw. And then Snack Run's kind of mediocre. It's really outshined by Renew in Priest. I mean, if you get a high-cost card, sure, you get a bit more healing, but would you pay an extra mana just for some more health? I don't know, and I don't think Paladin would want to do that either. So I think this is the most lackluster card in Paladin. And then the last one is High Exarch Yrel, which is a pure Paladin synergy card. This is going to push pure Paladin back into relevance, as the pure Libram Paladin was kinda losing relevance because of the Penflinger version. They were kind of competing with each other, but I think this card cements pure Libram Paladin as the dominant Libram Paladin. To sum up, pure Libram Paladin is coming back, and maybe pure Silverhand Recruit Paladin is coming, maybe like a one-of Oh My Yogg, and N'Zoth Paladin might see a little bit of play, but it's a bit fringe, I have to admit. The last class for today is Priest, and I was able to come up with 2 archetypes and a pretty large other category that can see some overlap in the 2 archetypes. First off, we have Resurrect Priest, the Priest archetype that everybody loves. And with that, we have Idol of Yasharaj and Blood of Gahoon. Now, I think these cards are instant inclusions in Res Priest, just because they work so well with the deck. Idol of Yasharaj is great for pulling out utility, like previously pretty much utility minions like Convincing Infiltrator and Cartoot Defender from your deck even stronger than they ever could be. And Blood of G'huun is just overall great because it has Taunt, and it repeatedly summons 5/5 copies of minions. It's an immediate threat that must be dealt with in a Res Priest deck, because it can snowball so quickly, especially if it summons multiple copies of itself. Next up is Spell Tempo Priest, with quite a few cards, those being Fairground Fool, Nazmani Bloodweaver, Auspicious Spirits, the Nameless One, and Fortune Teller. All of these cards, except for maybe Nazmani Bloodweaver, are very tempo focused. Fairground Fool is kind of it's okay. It's base stats at worst and like fine corrupted. It probably won't make the cut into the deck. Next is Nazmani Bloodweaver. This one's pretty interesting. A lot of spells are played in this spell tempo mage, and Nazmani Bloodweaver is just the perfect thing to hit all of your heavier cards in your hand, like Fortune Teller. It can really be effective, especially if you have like spell discounts from maybe palm reading, and you can just make a huge chain of stuff getting reduced in cost. I think this one is a fairly good card, and maybe it can go past the tempo archetype and into other more control-y type priest decks. Next is the Nameless One, which is a very good card. It's just straight up Spellbreaker, but better. One, it copies the minion and then silences it. So if it has an end of turn effect or death rattle, then it can become a very good card. But you don't want to silence your friendly minions and get a 4/4 copy of one of your friendly minions. That's a bit counterintuitive. This is most effective against enemy minions, but the option is there to copy a friendly minion. I think it's just flexible enough to be pretty much an auto-include into everything except for Res Priest. And lastly, we have Fortune Teller, which is an interesting card because this kind of mid-game stat bomb for Tempo Priest is an interesting concept, because while it may be difficult for your opponent to handle, it kind of relies on you having a full hand of spells, which you might not have in a tempo deck. And this card provides no utility other than stats and taunt, so in the end it might be just overshadowed by other 5 mana cards that do its job better. To wrap up the priest class, we have a few miscellaneous cards that could probably be fit into any of these archetypes, and those being Insight, Palm Reading, and G'huun the Blood God. Insight is just all around a great card. 2 mana, draw a minion and reduce its cost by 2 is a very good effect, and corrupting it is worth it, especially for its low cost. Corrupting it is pretty easy. And then Palm Reading, also very good, especially in the spell tempo deck when you want to reduce all your things, but maybe it's too slow for that because it does cost 3 mana up front. So instead you might say, hey, I want to run this in Res Priest. That'd be cool. There are a lot of high cost spells in Res Priest that I want to get out earlier, so Palm Reading would be a good choice. And last is G'huun. I think this is the wild card for me, because I don't really know where this would go, but the effect is pretty insane. Making things cost health instead of mana is always good, no matter what class you're in, no matter what game plan you're going for. But I don't know what about this card makes me doubtful of its quality. Its effect is really good, but it can't be used in Res Priest because its body kind of sucks. Like, you don't want to resurrect an 8/8 over and over, you want to resurrect something with more utility. It's an 8 mana card, which means it can't really go into a tempo deck that wants to pull it out. early, right? So maybe it just kind of fits into Highlander Priest, which has been a pretty good Highlander deck. So this one's kind of interesting. This one's kind of tough to place. But all in all, Res Priest is, sadly, more oppressive than ever. There might be a resurgence in more tempo-heavy priest decks with the new spells and minions that focus on spells, and Highlander Priest got some pretty good cards. And that is going to wrap it up for the second part of Madness at the Darkmoon Faire card reviews. If you like what you see, consider subscribing. It helps out the channel more than you would think. It helps more people find this community that we have together, and we can get more people to share more ideas. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you on the next one.